So I'd like to start with our first panel discussion of the day. This is our breakfast briefing, Women in Procurement. So let me welcome to the stage Kimberly Reynolds, Chief Procurement Officer at Coca-Cola Bottlers Sales and Services, Kathy Presto, Chief Procurement Officer at HH Global, and Nancy Tiran, Global Head of Commercial Procurement at AstraZeneca. A warm welcome for our panel, please. As you may have guessed from my graphic, we were expecting Jennifer Baez as well, but unfortunately she wasn't able to join us this morning. We send her our best. So let's get on with things, and I'd like to start with the elephant in the room, if we may, the fact that I am an increasingly middle-aged man hosting a panel on women in procurement. And I, for one, see that as a good thing, because I'm sure we've all been to plenty of events where you go to the Women in event and they bus in a female presenter just to host the one session, and they're not seen for the rest of the day. So anyway, I've taken on that elephant in the room of why I'm here and doing that. Where I'd like to start first, though, is what I always affectionately call elevator intros, where I ask all of the panel just to introduce themselves in 30 seconds. From my experience, if you ask people to give you a minute, they give you about 3. But if you after 30 seconds, people feel the pressure and tend to give you 30 seconds. So Kimberly, if I could start with you, please.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here today, and I think that this conversation is very timely and very necessary, so I'm pleased to be here. Again, Kimberly Reynolds. I'm Chief Procurement Officer of Coca-Cola Bottlers Sales and Services, which is an independent entity that sits between the Coca-Cola Company as well as the independent bottlers in North America. So we've got a vast majority of categories, a relatively large team, servicing nearly 70 independent bottlers in North America, inclusive of the U.S. and Canada.
Thank you, Kimberly. Kathy.
Hi, Kathy Presto. I'm the Chief Procurement Officer of HH Global. We are a marketing activation company operating in 65 different countries around the world. I have a team of about 300 people, many of which are with us today, based in New York City, but spend a lot of time in Chicago.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Nancy.
Hi, everyone. Nancy Tiran. I lead the global commercial procurement team for AstraZeneca. Commercial in the pharma world is basically indirect, so non-drug side. Very familiar categories with everyone that is here. Very global company, very matrix organization, really big, built for speed to make sure that we can get messaging and products out to those that need as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, well, let's start with the why of this conversation, and that is why it's still so important for us to have this kind of conversation. I know progress has been made. Has enough progress been made? No. We've covered that bit already, so let's move on to the next bit of that conversation. Kimberly, I'll start with you if I can. For you, why is it so important we are still having this particular conversation today?
You know, it's a really good question. Like I said earlier, it is timely too. It's really important because those of us that are sitting in leadership positions within procurement recognize that we're more than just the strategic sourcing entity or function within business. We are actually driving significant value. We're absolutely driving risk mitigation in significant ways. And we're also the economic kind of powerhouse, right? Because we're driving financial performance and strong operational excellence for our organizations. And the reason why it's important to continue to have this conversation about women in procurement is because we are going to be looking for talent that can continue to drive innovation, resiliency, and great results. And of course, when you're not tapping into the greatest talent and you're not being able to unlock that potential across all genders in particular, then I think we do ourselves a disservice. And so for me, it really is important to make sure that we are elevating the leadership profile of women, because not only when you offer the opportunity to have the seat at the proverbial table, we're going to change the rules, change the results as well, and making sure that we can continue to allow there to be greater opportunities for generations behind us of great leaders too.
Thank you. Kathy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just to echo what Kimberly said, I think women bring a different perspective to the workplace. And whether you're in procurement or in any other role in the company, there's different perspectives, not only from a gender base, but also geographically. So, as I mentioned, we operate in 65 different countries. So the perspective that we get from having both men and women in the business brings a lot of value to what we do. And I mean, we do very similar to what Kimberly said, from a risk mitigation, bringing value to the company, ensuring that what we do day in and day out brings value to our clients and also protects our clients, hence the risk mitigation portion of it.
And last but not least, Nancy.
Wow. Building, because those were amazing. It's really right, the role of procurement's changing. We're really getting a seat at the table. We've been fighting for it for a really long time, but now it's really about driving those relationships, driving the strategic nature, driving the operational decisions, and then really doing all the other things that are new because of the changing environment. So I think it's even more important that we have representation, we have different perspectives so that we can actually bring everything forward in a way. Doing things in isolation or within a single mindset really isn't going to get us where we need to go for the future.
Where I'd like to go next is your individual stories, because I don't think there is a single person in this room who works in procurement who went to their high school careers office and said, I'd really like to work in procurement. Did anyone do that? I'm yet to find anyone who has. One day, there's going to be a hand at the back of the room and said, yes, I did. And that'll completely spoil that particular line. But I'll start with you, Kathy, on your story. How did you get into your position?
So I actually started off in the publishing industry, working for a magazine, and started buying print and paper for the magazine, all the special projects that they did and reprints. And after doing that for a couple of years, I moved to New York, and actually the printer that I work with the most came to me and said, we have a procurement position open to negotiate the corporate agreements for everything but paper, and you would be awesome at it. And I was hired in, again, what was a very male-dominated industry. I used to fly down into Nowheresville, Tennessee, Illinois, where they didn't even have hotels or restaurants. And I would tell the pressmen what kind of ink they were going to use, what kind of press chemistry they were going to use. And I was the triple threat. I was from New York, I was corporate, and I was a woman. And I became really good at what I did and engaging with the people who could make things happen and succeed in what I was negotiating. So I just kind of evolved into it. Like you said, I did not go to school for procurement and just kind of evolved into it and have been in it ever since.
Well, that sounds like a real baptism of fire. We'll get into some more of those challenges in just a second. Nancy, your story.
Yeah, so I lovingly say, I didn't pick this. I didn't choose procurement, it chose me. I started my path through a less traditional way through media and marketing, really grew up in the agency marketing world, and really flipped sides from sales to buying and then into a more formalized procurement role. But I think you do what you do best, and it really just came very natural. I think people saw that skill and then started navigating my career path towards procurement, and here I am 20 plus years later, loving it. So yeah, the paths I feel of non-traditional paths can really bring that extra lens of sitting on all the different sides of the table, walking the walk, in the shoes, really understanding the pain points, the objectives, and the goals from different areas within organizations.
That does sound like the strapline from your upcoming biopic film. Procurement didn't, I didn't choose procurement, procurement chose me. Coming to a cinema near you soon. Kimberly, your story.
You know, very similar to everyone else. To your point, you don't necessarily pick procurement. Procurement does choose you in many ways. I'll tell you a funny story. When I was growing up, way back in the day, I actually wanted to be the next Oprah Winfrey. I thought I was going to have a career in television and media. I minored in communications, in fact, and thought that was going to be the trajectory. But for me, I ended up in business, and so I started my career as a commodity merchandiser with Archer Daniels Midland Company and moved into procurement with Diageo, and that happened because there was an introduction to them needing someone to do commodity risk management. So it's interesting to go from wanting to be in media into agribusiness, and now into procurement. And the way that opened up was just being very open to the idea of new challenges, new opportunities, to be able to still leverage the skill set of being an effective communicator and having the opportunity to be persuasive and influencing in the same way that I could have been in media, by applying that to procurement, because it's obviously very necessary and critical to drive innovation and being resilient in this function as well.
Well, you're very welcome to take over if you want to, because I can get coffee. Let's move on to some of the challenges you faced, and it was, Kathy, something you alluded to. But Nancy, if I can start with you, the key challenges you've faced in your career, how do you look back on some of those?
Yes, it's interesting, and I think a lot of it is around building your credibility and building your voice. When you're in a very male-dominated organization, sometimes it's hard to be polite, and sometimes you want to be polite, and it really doesn't allow you to find your voice or find your credibility. So it's finding those moments and finding your inner strength to really find your moments. So I think early in my career, I was probably a little too polite, and then found my way through and really inserting your voice and your vision and building that credibility, because it's not given to you. So I think that's really the lesson, at least for me, through my path.
Well, I'll just pick you up on that for a sec, because the age-old comparison, if a man is bossing a meeting around, they are strong, they have leadership. If a woman does it, they're classed as bossy. That's, I'm sure we've all heard that 100 times. For you though, Nancy, what was the moment where you realised how to get that balance right, to get that credibility? Because I'm sure that's a challenge a lot of younger professionals might be struggling with day to day.
I think it's about finding the moments, and then when you find those moments, make sure that they're really impactful. I know that was one of the words that someone said today, but right, like sadly, like assume you only get one chance, right? So how are you going to take your shot? So take your shot and then earn it. And then I think it's not only what happens in the room, it's what happens outside the room. So find your opportunity to build those relationships, build that credibility, find your advocates, and sit next to them in the room the next time, right? So it's about a building process, about just not only getting a seat, earning the seat, use it, and then use that as a mechanism to build your network and build your village, because it does take a village. Like, we can't do this by ourselves, so we do have to find our advocates, and sometimes you've got to work a little harder for it.
So it is. Kimberly, your story, and the challenges that you found.
The challenges that I found, especially early on in my career, was creating those opportunities similar to what you shared around how do I gain the visibility necessary to demonstrate my talent. Another challenge for me is just making sure that I was entering rooms that I had to continuously sort of prove myself over and over again, especially in rooms that I felt like I was prepared to lead already. So for me, it was really about how do I make sure that I elevate my leadership profile? How do I gain the right level of visibility to get those stretching opportunities that are very necessary to help you move to the next level? And then lastly, how do I make sure that I'm connecting with the right folks that can help me along the way in my journey? Which is a challenge, right? How do you navigate the waters and the systems that are in place within certain cultural experiences between each company that I've worked for? So for me, it's really about making sure that you are identifying the right opportunities at the right time to gain the right level of visibility and connecting with the right folks that can help you out along the way.
It is building that network, which, well, with the modern world, it doesn't have to be built on the golf course anymore, which I think is a big change. Kathy, can we go through some of those challenges you were mentioning there? You said you were the triple threat. Yes. I know from my past career, when I worked in publishing, I had a photographer who worked for me, and when she began, she was the only female photographer in a team of 20, and someone came up to her face and said, "You have taken a job from a man." Which I found absolutely astonishing. And by the time I left that business, I actually had an all-female team of photographers, which I was quite proud of. But you're talking there about being that triple threat. How on earth did you break those barriers down? That sounds like a real challenge.
I mean, I think you have to be credible in what you do, and you have to do your homework. If you go in there and you try to to BS your way through it, then you're going to be found out. And to echo what has been said, you do have to work a little harder, but I found that credibility through just spending time. I would go into the printing plants and I would wave to the plant manager and I would go right back in the press room. And I had some credibility because I used to do color OKs, so I kind of knew what I was talking about a little bit. And I gained that credibility. And then what really resonated with me years later was living in New York City. There was an unfortunate single-engine plane accident where it crashed into a building. And I had half a dozen pressmen text me saying, "Are you okay? Want to make sure it's not your building." So I knew I had gained their trust and credibility, and I would always find an advocate in them. But again, it's get an advocate. What I always say is the worst thing that can happen is someone says no if you ask the question. But 100% of the time, if you don't ask the question, the answer is no. So, and I have to attribute that to Rachel last night. So, because she said that.
Well, let's stick with the idea of advocacy for a second. It was something I was going to get onto a little bit later. And, the advice in these sort of discussions is often find yourself an advocate or be an advocate for others. Let's move it on to the how you can be an advocate, because sometimes people are reluctant to put their hand up and say, I can help you. I'd like to help you. Maybe they don't have the confidence to do that potentially if they're slightly earlier on in their careers. What's all your collective advice on that? I'll start with you, Kimberly, on this. How do you become an advocate? How do you go about that process?
Brilliant question. You said something that really stuck with me, and you said, because you want to. I think you have to not only say that I am going to be a sponsor, but actually champion because it's something that you feel passionate about and that you truly want to do. I think the way you go about that is by leveraging your relative power or influence in rooms where some of these great, talented women, and men too, but since we're having this conversation about women, I think it's important to, one, identify that really, top tier performer, those talented women that really do need the leg up, the assistance, the opportunity to have that visibility that I talked about before. So first and foremost, identifying the talent. Secondarily, after you've decided it's something that you're quite passionate about, make sure that you are offering up those opportunities based on what your power sphere is able to do to ensure that they have those opportunities. And then lastly, ensuring that you are making them that much more prepared based on the really sound guidance and perspective that you're offering up to them, that they're well prepared for those opportunities, that you're preparing that place for them. So decide that you want to do it, be passionate about it, actually make the move necessary while you're identifying that great talent along the way.
Thank you. Kathy.
Yeah, again, just to echo what Kimberly said, I've done a lot of mentoring. I have two daughters, both of who have graduated college. I was involved with the Career Center and mentoring women. At one of my daughter's schools, they had a women in business group, and I hosted it at my apartment and talked to them about what it was like to be a woman in business and some of the pitfalls and some of the things that you have to make sure that you do. And I love mentoring. I've joined a lot of women's groups and have those, I have a very close group of friends that grew up in the industry, and we all met trading war stories at a conference that was very male dominated. And I felt like after we opened the maybe third bottle of wine, everyone around us started listening to what we were saying and hearing the challenges that we had. So mentoring for me is a really huge thing.
Yes, the highly scientific third bottle of wine factor.
Yes,
It
highly
cannot be
scientific.
underestimated. Nancy.
I think advocacy can take on many different forms, everything from mentorship to, I would host women's network circles, so you can just take people from across the organization, all different levels, all different roles. And it's amazing the bond of commonality that you will find regardless of position or role or any of that. But I think one of the most important roles that everyone can do, and it doesn't matter, there's really no ticket in, it's really around being the person in the room that looks for inclusion and marks marks it and allows people to have that voice and have that moment. Anyone in any room at any time can say, Kimberly, I know you have an opinion on this, right? Just call out that moment or give someone that space and time, or someone who might still be too polite. Who else has a thought? I know that I've heard you share something, right? Like, but I think that's a role everyone can play, and you don't have to really be a certain title or a certain thing. Everyone can play that role.
That's right.
Where I want to take things next is about things that work, actions that work, because it's very easy in these sort of panels, as I said at the start, to say, well, more needs to be done. Congratulations, Captain Obvious. We have covered off a very obvious point. So let's look at the things that we have all seen being done that have worked, because it's the kind of information that everyone can take away, maybe recreate their own organisations. Kathy, if we can start with you, any examples you'd want to flag?
Yeah, I mean, I think mentorship programs at HH Global, we have a Women in Business program, female leaders, and they get together kind of independently of senior leadership and all discuss various things. And there's other groups that are in the industry that I think are really beneficial to join, and it's not only joining at the higher echelon of your career, but also as you're starting out and getting that type of mentorship and exposure.
Have you got any examples of that group has actually sort of delivered, any positive change that's actually delivered?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing more and more women. I mean, in terms of leadership in our company, we're well over 50% female employees. From a leadership perspective on our board, we're at about 35%, 40%. So I've seen that positive change. When I look back 5 years ago, we had an entirely male board. So lots of positive leadership and change.
Thank you. Nancy?
Gosh, I've seen lots of things, and I feel like they all work together. That it needs to be more than just a single initiative, a single something. You really have to create the thread work to make it all work. So everything from even something like a buddy program, right? Like something that's just more casual, a little more organic, up to like a mentorship. And then I feel like part of everybody's personal journey is also learning to know themselves. And when you know yourselves and you create your own confidence and your own courage, then you'll be able to really reach out beyond that. So I'm also a big component of self-awareness, self-learning, and having that be part of the thread work of somebody's career development plan, in addition to all these other things. I feel like more is more.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Kimberly?
You know, I will just add to owning your career to the point that you're making, and also the groups and the mentorship that's absolutely necessary. I think it's also important when we're talking about managing talent and talent development and identifying rock stars, as we call them. I think it's important to make sure that you're investing in their careers. That works really well too. So in addition to the individual driving for their own personal success, in addition to all the mentorships and groups that we have that really help to drive preparedness for you to matriculate within an organization, I think it's critically important that as we're making decisions around great talent and we're making sure that we identify those rock stars, as I called them before, that you're affording great opportunities, quite frankly, beyond just the individual approach or even the mentorship groups as well. Just got to make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, we've just done the glass half full part of that question. I'm going to flip it now to do the glass half empty version about things to avoid and things that shouldn't be done. I'm not going to push you for any names if it's an example of things you've seen. That would be deeply unfair of me. Nancy, your thoughts on there? What shouldn't be happening in this space at the moment? Your thoughts?
Oh gosh, I would say making assumptions about what people need or want. I think it's very personal, and I think we have to be really thoughtful about what's needed and what serves that individual versus making assumptions and sort of forcing those assumptions on people. I think we have to be really thoughtful of the approach and make sure it's tailored.
Kimberly?
What shouldn't be happening? I'd say let's not underestimate talent. Despite how early they are in their careers, or if there was a challenge in the past that perhaps they've been able to overcome, let's not just make some assumptions around how well they can perform at the next level. I think it really is important to making sure that you're driving for new opportunities that are stretching. So let's not underestimate talent based on those preconceived notions that you mentioned before.
Thank you. Kathy?
She stole my thunder. I was going to say the exact same thing. Don't make assumptions that there is going to be the development, that there is going to be mentoring, and then nothing happens. So, really be proactive in making sure that it happens. Don't assume.
My next question is slightly cliched, and that is advice to men with organisations, many who want to be an advocate, who want to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Again, it's slightly cliched and we don't want to make assumptions, but I know as a man working within a business, I want to make sure I'm doing the right things without being patronising, without doing the wrong things inadvertently. I'm not sure if any of that makes sense, but I think you get my general gist. Kimberly, can I start with you?
Sure, it's a very poignant question and a good one. I'd say that the first thing is allyship is action. I know we touched on this earlier around what works well, and I do think it's important that you use your relative influence and power and persuasion to speak up in the rooms where women are either A, uncomfortable to do so, or they need that champion to help them along the way. And I'd say secondarily, listen, truly and really listen to women and their experiences and challenges. Trust that process that you would be able to help them out. And then really decide, as I mentioned before, that this is what you want to do for this particular great talent that you've identified. And then truly model inclusive leadership. I think so many times we have lots of conversations like this, and to your point, we've got to get to how do we move forward and not continue just to have the conversation, but it's moved to action. I think it has a lot to do with modeling inclusive leadership and ensuring that you are demonstrating, right, what the right approach is in that regard, and that as you speak up, culture shifts. And that's exactly what we need for it to be sustainable, to have continued opportunities and leadership development roles for women in procurement.
Thank you. Kathy?
No, I kind of look at it almost from the reverse aspect, and it's like when you're sitting in a room as a man and there's women in the room, think about what you're going to say, and would you say that to your daughter who's just entering to the workforce? Would you say that to your spouse or anyone else? And chances are the answer may be no. So catch yourself and be supportive, and call on that woman in the room, because she may have a very unique and different perspective to the conversation going on. And I think you touched on it earlier, that if a woman pushes back, if a man does it, he's just tough and he's a tough negotiator. If a woman does it, she's emotional, or she's, a little witchy, with a B at the front. And
There are many words we can pick, but yes.
right, exactly. So there's different perspectives, and I think everybody needs to understand that. But I think the best advice is just, would you say that to your daughter? Would you say that to your spouse? Sure.
I absolutely love that perspective as a father of a rather precocious daughter. That makes me think about that. I know when I took both my son and my daughter, they're very, very close in age, to see a new high school. They both saw presentations from the head boy and head girl of said school. And we came away from it, and in the car on the way back, my son was absolutely buzzing because he realised he could pay for a bacon sandwich in the morning with his thumbprint. He was absolutely on cloud nine. My daughter came away saying, I'm going to be head girl. So that had inspired her. She'd found her advocate. It also says something about the comparison between my son and daughter. But no, I really enjoy your point there. Nancy, your thoughts?
I would echo Kimberly's point around, modeling good leadership, I would just call it, right? And but the part that I would add is be curious. Be really curious. Be really curious about opinions, about people's why, about what's behind the statement that they're making. I think we'll all learn a lot if we can all just be a little more curious.
Yeah.
I like that. I can feel the sage nodding coming from the room on the back of that. I do have plenty more questions I want to ask, but I have no monopoly over questions in this room. So I'd like to throw it out to the room if anyone's got any questions for the panel. I know it's early. I know people are only one coffee in. And no one's adjusted their hair, so thank you for that as well. I'll carry on with my questions. I might come back to the room again in a second. And again, this is a slightly cliched question, but it's one that always fascinates me, and that is your advice to your younger self when you were first entering the industry. Yeah. Kathy, if I could start with you, your thoughts?
I would say don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't be afraid to have a seat at the table. You're just as smart as the person next to you. Maybe you have to work a little harder just to get that foot in the door. But I think don't be afraid, and that's along the lines of don't be shy to speak up.
Was there a moment for yourself, though, that you had that epiphany, if you like, when you thought, I've got to do that little bit more. I've got to be that much on the front foot. Was there a moment you could remember where you think, I've got to do this?
Yeah, I think it was that triple threat going into the printing facility. They're like, you're kidding me, right? You're going to tell us what we should be doing, and I showed them why it would work. You know, I think if you explain that, then you get that compliance and that partnership with them, instead of just saying, you will do this. So it's bringing them into the mix and explaining why it's going to work.
Absolutely. Nancy?
That was probably my epiphany.
Yeah. Nancy?
Gosh, I would say there's a few parts. So one, take more risks. Believe in yourself, take more risk. Own your career, own your decisions, and go for it, right? Like have the confidence and the courage in yourself to go do it. But I think what I've learned that I think is I think it's equally important is knowing yourself, knowing your why, knowing your purpose, and then knowing your worth and putting boundaries up and keep with those boundaries. And if you're not valued where you are, then go back to your earlier self and go find your courage and go find another room, because you will be valued somewhere else. So I think it's kind of the combination of those two things.
I have a wonderful story at a very similar event such as this, where it was a chief procurement officer. She was going to be hosting this meeting. The people walked in, and 3 of them passed them their coats. And she thought, well, what do I do at this point? You know, she was a relatively early on in her career, first senior role, and they were all passing them coats. So she thought, I could say something, or I could just do that and then go ahead and host the meeting and watch them squirm a little bit. And all of them came up and apologised at the end. But it's amazing how often you hear stories like that. Kimberly, your thoughts, your advice to your younger self.
I only have 60 seconds to talk to my younger self.
You can go longer.
I'm just kidding. No, if I had that time, and I'm reflecting on what both of you have said as well, is very similar. Never lose sight of your worth or your value because others haven't seen it yet. As I mentioned before, there's certainly opportunities and all these different memories and stories where I've had to sort of prove myself over and over again. But I have to remind myself or tell my younger self that your presence, your voice, your perspective is going to mean more than you realize, because your brand of collaborative and compassionate and clear and effective communication style of leadership is going to be valuable in the future. And I'd say that it's also important to ask for help. I know we touched on that a little bit, but it's important so that others know what you're trying to accomplish, so that you can identify the right champions and sponsors, so that you can get the visibility that's very necessary to make sure that you're successful in your career. And lastly, it's important as you rise to help others, because it's critically important to ensure that the legacy that you're leaving is going to be a lasting one, where, you know, some of those same barriers that I had to experience, this next generation of great leaders won't have to trip over them as well, because they've had some help with my experience as well.
And I'll do one last question if I can. We've got about five minutes left on this. And I guess it's a good way to round up, but it's also a slightly impossible question, for which I'm going to apologise for in advance. And is, how do we get to a point where we don't need to have this discussion, where we don't have to accept to a degree that some women in procurement do have to work that little bit harder when we look back on that and feel like it's slightly antiquated. Is it possible to get to that point? An impossible question. Nancy, I apologise, you're first.
I have hope that at some point, but I think current environment says we're going to have to keep marching on. So I have hope for the future, but I think everybody's got to play their role to get to an end state that looks different than it does today.
Kimberly?
I echo the same sentiment. I'm hopeful too. I think that if we are crystal clear in the idea that the future of procurement, the future of business will continue to be global, and we are going to need to reflect the communities that we serve in our consumer base. And if we want to be forward thinking, if we want to ensure resiliency and innovative thoughts and making sure that we are successful long term, then we will have women at the helm of leadership. We'll be, continuing to identify great talent across the spectrum, and women just have to be at the table in the future.
And Kathy, I'll give you the final word.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we've made a lot of progress. I think there's still a ways to go, and I think we're just going to have to continue to work hard. Again, with the current climate, we may still have a little work cut out for us, but I am hopeful.
And that is a nice, hopeful way to finish things. I've really enjoyed our conversation. It's taken us in places. I've had these sort of panels a number of times that I've not been in that sort of direction before, so thank you. After this session, we're next up with a fireside with Laurent Hyman at PepsiCo, Vice President, Strategy and Transformation Digital Procurement, which is quite a job title. But for now, my thanks to the room for Kimberly, Kathy, and Nancy.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.